In this tribute, we commemorate, along with our nation, those who have fallen in conflict. A formal act of remembrance has taken place every year at Wilson's since 1919. And despite the circumstances that we find ourselves in at present, and the inability to join together in the John Jenkins Hall, this important tradition continues. This year we focus on the sacrifices made by people from all over the world during the Great War. In September of 1914, Britain relied upon hundreds of thousands of volunteer soldiers. The playground at Wilson's in Camberwell was used as a recruiting ground by the army, a place where, if you were 18, fit for service and male, you could volunteer to fight for king and country. In 1914 it was possible for the whole school to meet together on a daily basis, to assemble from first form, year 7, to sixth form in the Great Hall in Camberwell. The assemblies from September 1914 were very different from any of those experienced by Wilson's before or since, even taking the Second World War into account. Because each day my forebear as headmaster, Mr. Knight, stood on the school stage and had the terrible duty of reading out the names of those old Wilsonians who had been killed, injured, or were missing in action. Some, of course, had long since left the school, but most were in their early 20s, or indeed as the war progressed and younger men were recruited, only 18 years old, leaving the sixth form and going straight into the forces. Almost 730 Wilsonians and staff fought in this war. In turn, 120 of them never came back. The War Memorial, which boys, staff and visitors walk past every day in the foyer, is one of the few physical objects brought from the old school in Camberwell to the new one here in 1975. Such is the mark of its spiritual and moral importance to us. The Great War was, above all others, about blind terror and fear, death on an industrial scale, soldiers torn apart, mangled by barbed wire and machine guns, annihilated by shells and shrapnel, of the disintegration of man into mud and slime, many lost for all time, with no marked grave. The origins of this war and the course it took are complicated, even to those who study it and have made it their life study. For those of us who seek to remember rather than study, there is an ever-present danger of oversimplifying this very complex human tragedy. To keep the soldier at the forefront of our thoughts, to truly remember, we must acknowledge the experience and its complexities, and not be tempted to accept a sterilised version of the truth. In some small way, and only taking one aspect of this terrible conflict, I attempt this in this tribute. Only Germany in 1914 referred to this as a world war, Weltkrieg, but whatever others called it, this was indeed a world war, with military action seen in Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and briefly the Far East and Central Asia. But it was also a world war because, on both sides, it involved men and women from across the globe. This was a direct consequence of the empires of the European powers, with Britain and France controlling the two largest colonial territories in the world. Except for Abyssinia and Liberia, the whole of Africa was part of one or other European empires. It's a little known fact that the first shots of the war were fired in what was then Togoland, part of modern-day Togo and Ghana. In 1914, the British Army was a highly skilled group of 100,000 men, known as the British Expeditionary Force. It was deliberately small so that it could be deployed quickly, and was not intended to be a mass land army. Whilst a small force may have been tactically sensible for minor conflicts, it was clear to the British government from the start that it would have to rely on volunteers to swell the ranks, but that even then they would need men from across the empire to play a significant role. The government took very little time in determining that they needed the support of the Indian Army. India at that time comprised modern-day India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, and the local Indian princes who ruled a third of the country in partnership with the British gave generously, funding 2 cavalry units. Indeed, almost all religious and community organisations were supportive of assisting, including the All India Muslim League, the Hindus of Punjab and the Parsi community of Bombay. The Indian Army was well trained and well respected by the British, with its ordinary soldiers known as sepoys, from the Persian sipali, meaning soldier. I have never been to these regions of the world, but I know enough to realise that travelling by boat from India to Western Europe would have been daunting. The Indian Army landed in Marseille in September of 1914 and fought in Ypres, Belgium, provided 50% of the attacking force at the Battle of Neuve-la-Chapelle, during which 4,200 of them were killed. And after action at Gallipoli, they played a decisive role in Mesopotamia. This was no small contribution. But today I will use the then India as but one possible case study. Although up to 1919 their contribution of 1.4 million men was the largest, there was a wide range of countries involved on both sides of the conflict, fighting or labouring for whichever power they were ordered or volunteered to support. Africa alone contributed 2 million men, 10% of whom were either killed in action or died as a result of injury or disease. In 1917, with America joining the war, 400,000 African Americans enlisted, with 200,000 of them serving in Europe. 16,000 men came from the West Indies, Honduras, the Bahamas and Bermuda. 140,000 Chinese labourers were paid to come and assist the French war effort in France and were essential to the army's smooth running. So why do we know so little about their contribution? So frequently they are mentioned as a passing aside. Given the significant contributions of men of many faiths, colours and creeds fighting all over the world, why is our consistent image of the war one which reflects a crucial part, the Western Front with typically European soldiers, but not the whole story? Well, whilst, as we shall see, there was some cultural sensitivity, there were also some unforgivable slights that these men faced. It is also the case that many are not remembered now, partly because of deliberate choices made at the end of the war. From the British Empire, Indian troops were the only ones to fight on the Western Front, and this was purely because the British had no choice in 1914, because they needed many more trained troops quickly. As soon as they were able to transfer them out of mainland Europe, they did so to Mesopotamia. Amar Singh, who was 36 and a King's Commissioned officer, noted in his diary, a very rare source for the historian, that the white British troops refused to salute him, despite it being his right. He noted, "Whenever we fail in the slightest degree anywhere, people raise a cry, whereas if the British troops fail under the same circumstances, no one mentions it. Plainly the thing is that if there is a success, it is due to the British element, but if there is a reverse, then it is all put down to the Indian troops." Before the war ended, the Imperial War Graves Commission established an important principle about how those who had given their lives for king and country should be remembered. That all, of whatever rank, should be buried in the same way, with, where possible, the same headstone. Most importantly, they would be remembered by name. Where it was not known where their body was, their name would be carved on a memorial to the missing. Although symbolic, I think this record of the name is important. My great-great-uncle Matthew Revitt is buried in France, having died on the Somme in 1916. His brother is buried in what is now Bangladesh. A few years ago, I discovered that Matthew's name was misspelt on his stone, Matthew with 1 T instead of 2. I felt strongly that having given his life, the least the country could do was record his name accurately. I was satisfied when it finally changed. Shockingly though, the principle of commemorating men by name was not consistently extended by the Imperial War Graves Commission to those who contributed from the Empire. In a town called Lehri in North Pakistan, for example, in contrast to those in our own towns and villages, there is a tiny plaque which simply says, "In memory of 391 men." Similar memorials exist in Mombasa and Dar es Salaam. On the Indian memorial in Basra, it names the officers, 665 of them, and then there is a line underneath which says heartbreakingly, "and 33,222 of other ranks." Was it all bleak? Was it all slight? It's true to say that the foreign soldiers were regarded as heroes by those in Britain for their sacrifice, their contribution hugely appreciated by the government. There were those who fought and worked alongside their brothers from abroad, who wrote of their bravery and spoke of friendships. And there were, given what I've said, surprising touches of cultural sensitivity. In December 1914, the first 345 injured Indian soldiers arrived by train in Brighton. It had been decided that they should be treated in 3 military hospital sites, including Brighton Pavilion. An enormous amount of effort was taken in catering for the parents' or patients' religious and cultural needs. Muslims and Hindus were provided with separate water supplies, and 9 kitchens were set up in the grounds so that food could be cooked by the patients' co-religionists. Sikhs were provided with a tented gurdwara in the grounds of the pavilion, and Muslims were given space on the eastern lawns to pray to Mecca. Although the great majority of soldiers recovered from their injuries, the 21 Muslim men who died were taken to the Shah Jahan Mosque in Woking, Surrey, and buried in accordance with Islamic tradition. The bodies of 53 Hindus and Sikhs were taken to a remote location high on the downs above Brighton, where a ghat, a funeral pyre, was built, so they could be cremated and their ashes scattered in the English Channel. A permanent memorial to them, the Chartree, was unveiled on the 1st of February 1921 by the Prince of Wales and stands there still. In Delhi, the so-called Delhi Gate, reaching 42 metres high, commemorates to this day the many men who gave their lives. Memorials stand across Africa, and in 2002 the gates in Hyde Park were dedicated to those from the Caribbean, India and Africa who gave their lives. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission has for many years been committed to ensuring that memorials all over the globe are kept at the highest possible standard, now recognising the important contribution of troops and labourers from around the Empire. The past is a complex place. We cannot alter it, but we can, as they are owed, write honoured soldiers from around the Empire back into our memory of it. This short stanza that I'm about to read is from an Indian poet, and it's entitled "The Gift of India." Gathered like pearls in their alien graves, silent they sleep by the Persian waves. Scattered like shells on Egyptian sands, they lie with pale brows and brave, broken hands. They are strewn like blossoms, mown down by chance on the blood-brown meadows of Flanders and France. The appalling image of a world at war and a vision of a world at peace are ideas we must never lose. The war these men died in helped to make the Britain and the Europe we live in today. And for all its many failings, it is, on the whole, a civilization that is free, tolerant and open. It is an area of the world where men and women of all different races and religions can and do live at peace together, expressly because of the contribution made by men and women of many religions and races. When we consider the alternatives available within the world today, and which could so easily have been our inheritance, we owe them all not just our brotherly respect, but also our gratitude. As part of this tribute, you will see the school captain lay a wreath at the war memorial. The last post will sound at some point in this tribute, and then there will be 2 minutes of silence with images associated with Wilson's, for you to remember the fallen in your own way.
When you go home, tell them of us and say, for your tomorrow we gave our today.
They went with songs to the battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end, against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, We will remember them.
We will remember them.
Stand!